Greetings, I'm John the Spirit.
I'm Arch Ezekiel.
There's a chicken. We automated pure daisies in the most unhinged way possible, and welcome to Ultimate Alchemy Recap Super Shorts. In order to automate the production of nether stars, which is needed in order to perform the challenge Automate True Clay, you need every single one of these essences. Which is, as you understand, a lot of essences. However, in this mod pack, we have graciously been provided with Alchemy Carpenters, which combine essentia to make other essentia. All you need is some Aqua Salus Mundus, which you can get by Magma Crucibling Salus Mundus. So theoretically, if you have all of the base files, then you could get any essentia you want using Carpenter Alchemy, which is why we have a massive stack of Carpenters. But in order to get those files in the first place, you need to get these Thaumcraft crystals. Or, I mean, I guess you could do it other ways, but they're all bad. And this is the most straightforward one, I say, as I stare at our Integrated Dynamics Pure Daisy automation. So we decided, I guess we should automate the Runes of Balance. We just need to automate the Runic Altar and the Pure Daisy. It'll be fine, we said. There won't be any problems. There were so many problems. These torches we don't even need these torches. Well, actually we do now, but we'll talk about it. These mana pools are useless. There are so many vestiges of our terrible system. Anyway, the system is okay now, but oh hey, look, it's making aluminum like we talked about in the last episode. You can almost tell they were recording this episode right after the last one. Shocking. Anyway, let's start with some simpler automations to get us back into the groove of integrated dynamics. Like, for example, the one that turns the Runes of Balance into all 7 crystals. Here we have a crafting pattern that just turns Runes of Balance into every air crystal. It shoves the Runes of Balance into this dropper. The dropper, if it drops the Rune of Balance into the Alfheim portal, will produce all of these crystals, and the Hopper Hawk will pick them up. The Hopper Hawk has been made into a petite Hopper Hawk by throwing it into an Alchemy Catalyst Mana Spreader, and that means it reduces its range. To see its range, I am using the Mana Seer monocle from Botania. You can turn on the dropper by using a redstone clock, but every time the dropper fires, it makes a clicking sound, even if there is nothing in the dropper. And Arch was like, that's horrible, that's terrible, that's extremely bad. You should turn off the redstone clock whenever there's nothing in the dropper. And I was like, ugh, fine. So I set up a rudimentary integrated dynamics system. It is actually, yeah. We could have just made a muffler, but that would only lower the volume, and there would still be a clicking noise here forever and ever and ever. So in order to tell if there were items in this dropper, we use an inventory reader and put a variable into the inventory empty aspect. And we got a variable called inventory empty, which checks whether the dropper inventory is empty, and if that's true, which it is right now, it sends a full redstone signal into this redstone clock, stopping the clock. Note that we actually needed strong power to stop the clock, which is something you can set false or true. It was set false initially, so we just added a true value to it. And anyway, that just allows us to not hear a redstone clock constantly. We didn't actually need this variable store, we just basically needed to give the aspect of inventory empty to the redstone writer. Then we made the Runic Altar automation, which was a little bit of a doozy in and of itself. Thankfully, the extra utilities mechanical user comes to the rescue. When you use activate block with item, the extra utilities mechanical user will place not only ingredients for a recipe, but also living rock onto the runic altar. So you can set up a crafting recipe to have all 3, and it'll just work. In order to cause the runic altar to actually make the final product, you do need to have a Wand of the Forest. The Wand of the Forest must be set to use item on block, and then it'll work. We're using an Elven Mana Spreader with a potency lens to make it faster. And we're using an item frame with living rock, so this Hopper Hawk does not pick up the living rock. Now, normally, item frames tell the Hopper what to pick up. But if you use a Wand of the Forest on function mode, you can change the Hopper Hawk to pick up only items not in frames, so it'll pick up everything except living rock. In order to make sure the crafter doesn't shove a million recipes into the runic altar, we have to put it in some kind of blocking mode, so we once again have it in Redstone Pulse Inserts Next Set. This inventory checker from RF Tools turns on if there is more than 0 items in slot 0, and it sends a redstone signal both to the crafter and to the importer, so that the importer can import the items. We don't want the importer importing the items before the inventory checker can get them, so that's why we have the importer also redstone controlled. So those were the easy parts, turning Runes of Balance into the crystals, and creating Runes of Balance out of the living rock, mutated grass, and infused grass. But now it's the pure daisy. There are a lot of probably pretty easy ways to automate the pure daisy, involving, I don't know, filtered breakers or something like that. But we decided to go a way that would allow us to parallelize this system as much as possible. You can see it in action right now. All these items are going to drop into the random Carpus Petite, and once the item stack is completely full, which will take 90 million years for reasons, once the random Carpus receives all of its items, those items will start getting placed on top of the torches. Because we have 2 mechanical users on the Pure Daisy, they will get almost immediately converted. And as soon as all 3 blocks are full of blocks that are allowed to be broken by this mechanical miner, the mechanical miner will activate. This ender porcupine transmits the action of the mechanical miner to all 3 of these blocks, so that the mechanical miner can break any of them, although it only breaks them when the ender porcupine has selected that block, which it selects slowly and gradually, one by one. As soon as the living rock is broken, a stone gets put in its place. That's the system, at least if you don't count the immense amount of integrated dynamics that goes into it to make all of this stuff work. Most of the complicated integrated dynamics logic involves how we tell the miners when to run. The miners need to run in a variety of conditions. The miners need to be able to break blocks if there's only 1 block that is allowed to be broken in the system and 2 air blocks. It must be allowed to break blocks when all 3 of the blocks on the torches are breakable, but it should not be allowed to break blocks if there is a living rock and a stone on top of the torches, because if it breaks the stone, then that wastes our time. And our precious stone. So we need to use block readers from integrated dynamics to tell when all the blocks are either air or a breakable block. And when I say breakable block, I mean a block that is the output of a Pure Daisy recipe, the output that we actually want, like infused grass or living rock or aluminum. We want to use these block readers to tell whether there are only breakable blocks in the spaces below them, and if it's completely composed of breakable blocks or air, then the mechanical miner should be allowed to run. So step 1 is just to make a list of breakable blocks. We made a list of static breakable blocks using the Portable Logic Programmer. Integrated Dynamics allows you to generate a list of, for example, blocks by going to the list type, going to block, and pressing the plus button. Every time you press plus, it adds a new entry to the list. An empty entry is counted as air, but if you put an item into the next entry, it'll add that to the list. So if we make this list, you'll see that it is composed of air and stone bricks. So we have a list called Static Breakable Blocks that contains living wood and a bunch of other blocks, including air. We would also like to have a list of all the blocks read by these block readers. And we split this up into 2 identical systems, one on the east, which is this side, and one on the west, which is this side. We'll just focus on the west, which is all of the top side here. So we want a list of the blocks in world. To make such a list, we start with a completely empty list, which you can make by just making a list with the block type, and this is an empty list of type block. To fill out the list, we use the append function. Append takes a list and an input and outputs a list with that item appended to it. Note, there are 3 block variable cards, each of which comes from the block reader parts 11, 10, and 9. So each of these 3 append operators takes the 3 block reader variables and adds them to a final list, which we call in-world blocks west, which is just the blocks in the world. If I put in-world blocks west on this display panel, it would just show air 3 times. Okay, so now we have 2 lists, a list of all in-world blocks and a list of breakable blocks, blocks that we are allowed to break. Now, all we need to do is check that all of the in-world blocks are breakable blocks. Easy, right? No. Normally, you would use a contains operator, which allows you to check if a list contains a certain entry. But if you want to check if a list contains all manner of entries, then you have a problem. You can't just put a wildcard here. You have to put a specific block, I think. But since we want to check that the blocks in world are any of the breakable blocks, we need to do something a little more complicated. And by a little more complicated, I mean a lot more complicated, but I'll try to explain it. We need to use a contains predicate. The contains predicate accepts 2 objects, a list and an operator. For every item in the list, it will check that list against the operator. If at least one of the operators returns true, then the list contains predicate will return true. The trouble is what kind of operator or predicate you put into the list contains predicate. Technically, pretty much all of the bits in the portable logic programmer are operators, so you could theoretically put any of them into the contains predicate. However, to actually get a version of an operator, you need to use the operator type. Search up your operator, which in this case we're going to use list contains, and then you get a version of the operator. But before I explain how this operator variable works, first I need to explain what predicate we need to use, and then I'll explain how to use the operator. We have two lists. We want to check if the in-world blocks west list contains blocks that are breakable blocks. So for every item in in-world blocks west, we should check if the breakable blocks contains that item. That means our list contains predicate should check if the list in-world blocks west, it should check every item in in-world blocks west and check if that item is contained in static breakable blocks. So that's why we have a list contains operator, but the list contains operator doesn't work correctly on its own. Operators are best used with the apply operator. The apply operator takes as one input operator, and as the other input what you would like to apply to the first signature in the operator. And then it returns an operator which has one of its inputs applied already. So we have an operator called contains general operator, which is just a general list contains operator. Currently, you can do nothing with it until we create an apply operator. This apply operator's first input is the contains general operator, and its second input is static breakable blocks. This generates an operator which has one input. The input is a block. The operator will check if that block is contained in the list static breakable blocks, and then return true or false. That is the operator we have here. Now that we have this operator, we can use it to work in contains predicate. Our contains predicate here, which checks if the west list contains breakable blocks, accepts the in-world blocks west list, which tells you what blocks are in-world, and then it accepts the operator we talked about before, which checks if the input to the operator is included in the list of static breakable blocks. So list contains predicate will check every element of the list in-world blocks west, and if any of them matches the predicate, that means that there is at least one breakable block in the west side. And this contains predicate will return true. So that covers the first condition. The mechanical miner should break breakable blocks, but how do we make sure that it doesn't break non-breakable blocks? We use a filter operator. The filter operator goes through a list and applies an operator to every item in that list. If the item returns true for that operator, it'll keep it in the list, but if it returns false, it'll kick it out of the list. The list we use is going to be the in-world blocks on the west side, so it'll iterate through all the in-world blocks, and the operator we'll use is the same operator we used before, the contains operator. So for every item in the list of in-world blocks, it will check if that item is a breakable block. If it is, it'll leave it inside the list. If it isn't, it'll kick it out. So if there are any non-breakable blocks here, that means anything except air or breakable blocks, the total length of this list will be less than 3. If that list of breakable blocks is exactly 3, then we use this redstone writer to send a redstone signal to the mechanical miner so that it starts working. Anyway, it turns out we didn't need these list contain predicates at all. We just needed to check if the length of how many breakable blocks there are is still 3. That was the clever bit behind using air. And of course, once the mechanical miner runs, thanks to our inner porcupine, it'll destroy all 3 blocks. If there's air, it won't destroy the block at all. We are also stopping the hopper from dropping blocks if all of these blocks are filled up with stuff. To do that, we concatenate the list of blocks in the west and east into a list called all in-world blocks, and then check using contains, much easier if it contains air. And then we say that we have space to place blocks. We negate that to do not place blocks, so if there is false no space to place blocks, then do not place blocks will be true, and redstone will pour out into this hopper, and then the hopper will not run. It doesn't work great when you first drop the items, though. But that is our over-engineered Pure Daisy automation. Originally, we were going to try and use like a weight lens from Botania to drop the item, to make the items fall like sand, The reason for this is because to break infused grass, you need Silk Touch, and the Boar Lens from Botania is not Silk Touch. But the Weight Lens would work as Silk Touch. However, we found out that the Weight Lens can only work if there are no blocks underneath the block you want to make fall. But if you know anything about how the runic carpus works, it requires you to specify what block it places things on top of. And here we have it placing things on top of a torch. So it's a lose-lose situation. If you want to place a block down with the runic carpus, you can't use the weight lens because there'll be something underneath it by definition of the runic carpus. So we had to use the mechanical miners in the end. But with all that said, we can now automate runes of balance, and we did. In the next episode, we'll talk about how we used runes of balance to automate every one of the basic files, and then get the carpenters. And if we get the chance, we may also talk about flux cleanup, a thing we did not do. But anyway, that's it for today's episode. If you have any comments for viewers about anything we did or anything that can help in other viewers playing Ultimate Alchemy, please let us know. For example, if there's just a video you know that automates the Pure Daisy 90 million times better than this, but also uses Silk Touch, then please also let us know.
So, first thing we could have done is put the torches one block lower and use pistons to move the block in and out of underneath the runic carpus placement, so that once a mana lens with the weight lens fires through the blocks would actually be able to fall down onto the torches and break from the top.
Our concern with that, though, was that it would require way more integrated dynamics shit, and we weren't sure how to do that quite yet, and that broke our brains, so we did not use that route.
The next thing we could have done is put a mechanical miner on each single one of these blocks, and that would let us actually be able to do it all fully in parallel. However, it would require a lot more infrastructure and space and more integrated dynamic jump, and so we opted. Something else we could have done is put more mechanical miners on the Ender Porcupine, and in theory, we would be able to mine more of the blocks at once, but we're worried about it, like, over-mining or something, so we're not sure if that would work properly.
Yet another option could have been to reduce the number of spaces we were working on and use observers to check when the block changed, which is something they can do, but it might have required some RS latch stuff that I was a little worried about. So we didn't do that, but it probably would have been the easiest of these tricks because it wouldn't require you to sense which block was actually in the space. You just need the observer to tell that the block has changed. But the observer also tells when the block is placed in the first place, so you know, problems. But yes, anyway, that is it for today's episode. We'll see you in the next one, when we talk about Thaumcraft again.